Hello, everybody. Sorry I couldn't make it today. Before I get started, I just want to let you know that I am going to uh, go through some of the notes, and I would encourage you at any point if you need to pause the video and type down some things, or pause the video and type what's on the screen before I move on. Anything like that, that is totally fine. Just do the best you can with this video today. If you have any questions, feel free to email me with them, or you can comment on this video in Google Classroom. So let's go ahead and get started with the video here. Of course, we've already talked about the major types of government in class a few times, but just to go over it very briefly, there's autocracy. The two types of autocracies that we have talked about are totalitarian dictatorships and monarchies. Autocracies are the oldest and one of the most common forms of government. Totalitarian dictatorships want complete and total control of your life. This would be like North Korea. Monarchies are usually kings or queens that exercise total power on you. They have total and unlimited power as well. An example of this would be Great Britain. Years past, anywhere between 14, 15, 16, 17, and even a little bit of the 1800s. Next type of governments we've spoken about are oligarchies and democracies. Oligarchies are any group where there's a few that have power. They derive their power from their wealth, their military power, or social position. A couple examples of these would be Russia or China, where there is one political party that dominates the entire state, and no one else really has the opportunity to have power or gain power in this scenario. Democracy is the last one we spoke about in types of government. Democracy is any system of government in which people have the power. Direct democracy, of course, is a lot of work. We would be voting very, very often as a population. Typically only works in places that have small populations. And then representative democracy, the democracy we know and love here in the United States, where we elect representatives and give them the responsibility and power to make decisions on our behalf and give up our sovereignty a little bit here. And it's very important to note that voters are the source of the government's authority in a republic, which is a representative democracy. They are the same thing. And what I left you with yesterday here were the beginnings of these four things. Again, a quick review. Individual liberty is exercising your rights that were given to you in the Constitution. So individual liberty is very important, because if we did not have liberty, we wouldn't be able to exercise the rights that we've been given in both the United States Constitution and the state constitutions. Majority rule with minority rights. This essentially means what we talked about in class, that just because the majority of people voted for one thing does not necessarily mean that the people who didn't vote for that are going to lose any of their rights. They'll have the same rights that they had before. They just didn't get what they want or what they wanted. Endo v. US. This was a Supreme Court case in which a man by the name of Endo sued the United States. And we talked about it in class, so I won't speak on it very long here. But he essentially sued the United States because he was a United States citizen, and he was forced to leave his home and do these things, go to Japanese internment camps. And the importance of this Supreme Court case is that if you're an American citizen, at no point can you have any of your constitutional rights taken away from you unless you are in jail. That's the only exception. Some will argue that the military is also an example of where you may lose some of your rights. But for the most part, as a United States citizen, you will have your rights from the day you're born until the day you pass. Free elections are also incredibly important when it comes to characteristics of democracy. Now think as if you were walking into a voting booth. And in this voting booth, anyone around you could see exactly who you were voting for, including people who may or may not want to cause you harm or may not have a lot of power. So if you walk into this voting booth and you see that there are people who maybe have firearms or weapons of some kind, and they are tempting you or are forcing you, I mean, to vote in a certain way, you're going to be less likely to show up to vote anyways. Because if you don't feel safe, why would you risk voting in the first place? So it's very important in free elections to have a few of these things here. So, number one, you need to be able to not be afraid of how you are voting. So that's the third one down there. May vote freely by secret ballot. That needs to be the case because if you didn't vote by secret ballot, other people could know how you voted, and you may change your vote based on how other people feel. And that's not what we want. We want a true representation of democracy. It's also very important to have one person, one vote. Think about for a second if the person to the left or right of you had two votes and you only had one, would that truly be a democracy? Would you truly be equal? Or would the person next to you have twice as much power? And of course, the answer is in that scenario, yes, they would have twice as much power as you would. But in the United States, we pride ourselves on the fact that all citizens are created equal. And if anyone's vote would count more than once, then there's it's really not a free election and it's really not an equal election. Second thing down there, citizens may help support candidates. So if you have a particular candidate you feel very strongly about, one that you may want to be elected to a certain office, you are more than welcome to volunteer for that person, answer phones and make phone calls, put signs in people's yards, or have a sign put in your yard. This all helps other citizens communicate with citizens of their communities and allows them to basically say what it is that they want in a candidate, and they can help their neighbors sort of decide who it is that they want to vote for. And the fourth one, competing political parties. This is an absolute must when it comes to a democracy. If we just had one political party, there would be really no sense in voting for any person in particular because you would just be getting the same people from the same political party. And that's not truly democracy. We need to have competing opinions. We need people to disagree so that we have more than one option when we go to vote. So, very, very important that we have competing political parties. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be two parties, it can be any number of parties that are available in this state. But we need to have competing political parties so that people have choice and that people can find political parties that most closely match their beliefs. So, what is a political party? And I have a definition up here for you. A political party is a group of individuals with broad common interests who organize to nominate candidates for office, win elections, conduct government, and determine public policy. Now, I know this is quite a long definition here, but I think it's really important to list all of these things because they do have a very broad common interest. They do nominate candidates for office. They do try to win elections. They do all of these things. What's important to understand about a political party is that you can support a particular candidate of a political party, but that does not necessarily mean that you have to be a part of that political party. A lot of times in the United States, people kind of follow this myth that if their parents were one political party or if they have a politician that they strongly believe with or of a political party, then they are a part of that political party and they have to follow that political party. And that's not always the case. The key when you're voting in a democracy is always to ensure that the candidate you are voting for is the one that most closely resembles what it is that you want out of the government. So you may change your political party all the time in order to nominate a candidate for an office that you think is best, regardless of your political views. Now, throughout the world, a lot of states have multi-party systems. Great Britain has a multi-party system. Germany has a multi-party system. The United States is definitely the most well-known example of a two-party system. Of course, the Republicans and the Democrats That is not to say that we don't have any third parties. We have plenty of third parties. The American Socialist Party, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party. There are all kinds of parties that do exist in the United States. But when it comes down to it, there are two major political parties that have vast amounts of money, whose goal it is to get their people elected to office and to help those people stay in office upon reelection attempts. So the United States is a little bit different in that sense. The soil of democracy. So these are things that democracies absolutely have to have. First and foremost, active citizen participation. Citizens need to vote. In a democracy, it will not function properly if citizens don't exercise their rights as citizens, if they don't show up to the voting booths and vote for laws, if they don't elect members of the House, if they don't elect members of the Senate or local officials, mayors and council members, or if they don't elect state legislatures, democracy would cease to exist. It would cease to function. Think about that. If we had an election and nobody showed up, is that truly democracy? And in my opinion, absolutely. Absolutely. That is the people speaking up and saying, there is no viable candidate that is being offered, and we are not going to vote. Now, that scenario is unlikely, of course. But the only way for democracy to truly work is if we get as many people to vote every single time so that each and every person's viewpoint is heard when we are electing people. You also need a favorable economy and a democracy. Now, money makes people do some crazy things. And particularly, we've already talked about the idea of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the proletariat being the poor working class, and the bourgeoisie being the merchant class with lots of money, and how that can sort of create a divide in terms of a state and how you live in harmony. So, a favorable economy means that we need to have jobs for people to go to make a living so that they can make money and so that they can support their families and so that they can spend that money that they make at their jobs in other places, thus boosting the economy. Because if citizens don't have a means of providing a way of living for themselves, they're going to be much, much, much more unhappy with their governments than they would be if they had no jobs to go to at all. So, a favorable economy is very important to a democracy to ensure that the citizens have the ability to make a living. And one way we do that here in the United States is something called free enterprise. Free enterprise is the opportunity to control one's economic decisions, and it provides a base for making independent political decisions. So, what that means is if you go to a store and there are three different types of ketchup at that store, you have the right to decide which brand of ketchup you like the best. If you don't like Heinz the best, we got some issues. But you are free to buy Hunt's ketchup or generic ketchup from whatever store that you're buying. In some states, that's not the case. In some socialist and communist states, it's whatever ketchup is available in the store is just one brand, the one kind, because they believe, why would they offer multiple brands? We have one brand, it's fine, it's good. But in the United States, we have the ability to choose what it is that we want to buy. And this is the case for anything. You can buy whatever car that you want. Nobody tells you which car to buy. You can buy whatever shoes you want. You can buy whatever clothes you want, but you can't wear them to CTC unless you have that CTC logo, right? So you can do and buy and purchase anything that you want. And it's totally up to you. And this is the basis for those political decisions as well, because if we get to choose what we buy in the economy, why wouldn't we get to choose who our representatives are in Congress? So, very, very important. States with stable economies are way more equipped to handle democracies. Because if you don't have good economies and you have high unemployment rates, it requires the government to sort of intervene and use some of their power to help those citizens and give them some economic stability. And what I mean by that is to give them a way to survive. And sometimes that requires the government's power. So if people don't have the means to provide themselves a living, it's much more difficult to maintain a democracy because people are less concerned about the government and more concerned about how they're going to feed themselves and their families each and every night when they go home. Another key to the soil democracy is widespread education. And that's what you're doing right this very second. Now, you're probably thinking widespread education. But what exactly does that mean? And what widespread education means is that everybody in a democracy has the opportunity to be educated. And we're not talking about every person receiving a college degree, right? It's what society tells us makes a successful person. Of course, we all know that's not true, right? We need skilled labor. We need trades. We need career centers to teach those trades. And the level of your educational attainment definitely does not correlate with your level of success. So when we're talking about widespread education, we're talking about education K through 12, and we're getting a general understanding of how democracy works, how to develop critical thinking skills, so that when we go to vote, we're able to make good decisions, or at least decisions that are based in an educational place, and not just voting to vote because so and so said so, or because your parents said so. With widespread education, you're able to develop your own opinion on each and every matter. We also need a strong civil society. Now, I know a lot of you maybe don't know what a civil society is, so I've included a definition here for you. Civil society is a complex network of voluntary associations, economic groups, religious organizations, and many other independent groups. This is basically organizations that exist in the United States that aren't the government. So this could be voluntary association. So for example, if you live in a village or a town or some sort of municipality that has a firemen's association, odds are you do not have full-time firemen. So you have a volunteer firemen association. And what happens? Of course, they're not volunteering their time. When there is a fire or some sort of disaster in which they need to respond, those individuals come from their homes or from their other jobs and they leave and they go to the firehouse, they get dressed and they go. That's part of civil society. There's economic groups as well. So various economic groups could be businesses, it could be tax preparation places. These all make up civil society. Religious organizations. Those are churches. Those are different sects of different religions that come together and communicate with each other and provide a place for citizens to express their religious beliefs. And of course, there are many other independent groups. So other independent groups in civil society, one of my favorite groups that exists in civil society is 4-H. 4-H is a spectacular organization, definitely something that impacted my life very hugely. Other parts of civil society could even be like Major League Baseball and the NFL and different groups like that that really give people something to do, something to look forward to, something to enjoy while they are citizens of this particular state. So another thing that helps a strong civil society is a social consensus, and this is where citizens all accept democratic values such as equality for all. And this is kind of going back to the consistency that we spoke of in the first notes section about the United States being one of the most stable governments in the world. It definitely is one of the most stable governments in the world very easily. And again, you cannot focus on the differences of political parties, especially between Democrats and Republicans. You need to focus on the overarching ideas here. For example, everybody that is involved in politics believe that everyone should be free and everyone should be equal and everyone should be able to vote and everyone should have access to healthcare and everyone should have access to education. All of these things are consistent in every political party wants individuals and citizens to have those opportunities. Now, and again, to reiterate what I've already said previously, where we differ in the United States is not necessarily the goal, where we're going, it's how we get there. So both the Democratic and Republican parties want to provide widespread, high quality education to every person in the United States. How that education is provided is a little bit different between the two. So the goal is the same. That's social consensus. How we get there is a little bit different, and that's where political parties come into play. So, um, another example of something that both political parties would agree upon here in the United States is that we should follow a system of capitalism. But before we jump into these economic theories, before we start something kind of new here, we need to talk about economic theories and what economics is in general. So, the definition I have there for you is that economics is the study of human efforts to satisfy seemingly unlimited wants through the use of unlimited resources. Okay. Looks like I made a spelling mistake there. That should be the use of limited resources, not unlimited resources. So basically, as human beings, we want things, and our want for things is never going to go away. So, economics is a way to try and satisfy our wants with the amount of resources that we have available to us. And the three major economic decisions that need to be made in any economic theory is what and how much should be produced, how goods and services should be produced, and who gets those goods and services. So, again, what and how much should be produced. So, what are we producing? What are we going to make? And when we do make it, what's the number of goods that we should make? And number two, the process of making those goods. Is that process a good process? Is it something that we can make better, more efficient? And third, who gets those goods and services? So these are three important questions to continue asking yourself as we move on through these economic theories. So, economic theory one, what we have here in the United States, it is capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system with freedom of choice and incentive for workers, investors, consumers, business enterprises. So, um, let me boil that down for you. Capitalism is a system where citizens have the freedom of choice. It goes hand in hand with free enterprise. We as citizens have the ability to buy whatever good that we think is the best or whatever good that we just want to buy, that we just want to have. We have the ability to buy that. It also allows investors and businesses to start their own, start from the ground up. You can start a small business and it can grow and it can expand and it can be this huge, great business. That's what capitalism is. It's the ability to do whatever it is you want. Starting your own business, buying the pair of shoes that you love. Capitalism really boils down to freedom of choice, and it has five main characteristics here. First, private ownership of property and resources. So, as far as capitalism goes, owning the property in which you live or have your business is very important because you need the ability to decide what's best for your business, and people need to buy their own land. If the government owned all of the land, or if the public owned all of the land, you would have to ask for permission to do certain things when it comes to your business, and you truly would not have the ability to use that land in the way you wanted. Same thing with resources. So if somebody owns a resource, they can sell that resource to somebody else, or they can refine that resource, meaning they can take whatever natural resource, let's say it's oil, and they can use it to make all kinds of things. It's their resource, and capitalism needs that private ownership so that they can capitalize on those things. Number two, free enterprise, something we've already talked about that I won't hit on very highly again, but just remember that is freedom of choice. Number three, competition among businesses. So this is a really great thing, especially from a consumer's perspective. If you're spending money, if you have businesses that are in the same market, they're going to compete with each other. So, for example, wireless companies like Verizon and AT&T and T and Sprint have been competing with each other for a number of years to lower the price of their phone plans or to offer different phone plans for different prices. So, I think it's a pretty well-known fact that Verizon costs more, but tends to have a little bit better service. Whereas companies such as T-Mobile uh, claims that their service is very good, and it very well may be, but it doesn't have quite the reputation that Verizon does. However, the trade-off for having less reception, in theory, is less cost. So is it worth the reduced costs to have less service? And that's competition. One business is saying, hey, our service may not be as good, but our price is better. And that allows people to sort of have this ability to say, you know what, Verizon, you charge too much for what I need you for. I'm going to go to T-Mobile, just for an example. Number four, freedom of choice. So you need to be able to decide where you're going, what it is that you would like to purchase, and which item that you think is better than the next item. And number five, possibility of profits. There needs to be the possibility to make some money on anything. So if you would have told anybody 150 years ago that every grocery store, every market in the United States would sell bottled water, they would have thought you were insane. Why would you buy bottled water? It doesn't make any sense. You can get water from a stream, from a creek, from a pond. You can get it from a well. You can pump it out of the ground. Why in the world would you pay somebody to bottle your water and then bring it back? But somebody realized the possibility for profits if the water is clearer than it would be otherwise, or if the water is from somewhere else or has some sort of nutrient in it. And the possibility of profits for that market is what created the bottled water industry. Capitalism uses a free market, which frees buyers and sellers to make economic decisions. So, what that means is who sets the price on a good? So, if you want to buy a Ferrari, who sets the price of the Ferrari? Now, you're probably thinking the seller. The seller sets the price, of course. In a way, you're correct. But the buyer's ability to buy that good also sets the price. So, if there's a new Ferrari and they make it $1 billion, they probably wouldn't sell as many of them if they made the cost $2 million. Now, $2 million is still a lot of money, of course, but it's a comparison between 2 million and 1 billion. So if the buyer is willing to pay a premium price for a good, the seller can charge a premium price for a good, but it also needs to be within the means of the buyer. So they can only charge as much as the buyer is willing to pay for that good. But if you notice, in my entire explanation here, I haven't said government. The government doesn't set what the prices on things are going to be and doesn't really interfere with economic decisions at all. And our last couple of things here, I'll go ahead and put them all up there for you. Adam Smith, he's a famous capitalist author. He really loved capitalism. He's the one that's famous for creating the term laissez-faire, or to translate means to let alone. And he spoke about this in his book called Wealth of Nations. And this is where he really outlined these five main characteristics of capitalism up above. And competition is the absolute basis of capitalism. If there aren't companies competing with each other for what citizens want, then it really just turns into socialism. It just turns into the one group that could possibly produce something, and then they can just charge as much as they want. Companies constantly need to produce. In the world, there are no pure capitalist systems. There are no economies in the world where the buyers and sellers set the price and get to decide the market on everything. And you're probably wondering, well, what do you mean? The United States is as close as we can get, but even in the United States, we do certain things. And I've mentioned this before, but for example, in the United States, we have agricultural subsidies. And what happens with those agricultural subsidies is the government takes tax dollars and they pay them to dairy farmers, for this example. And those dairy farmers produce milk. But what it costs to produce that milk is far more expensive than what people can afford. So the government just takes a little piece of your tax dollars, it redistributes that tax money back to those dairy farmers and says, okay, keep producing the milk, even though it's really expensive, and sell it. And this income that the government gives these farmers allows the farmers to sell the milk at a lower price so that every person, regardless of how much money you make, has the ability to buy milk, which is considered one of those necessities. So we have what's technically called a mixed market economy, but we're not going to get to that today. That is something we are going to get to on Friday. So I hope you enjoyed everything that I've given you here. After you're finished with this, um, that'll be pretty much be it for the day. So make sure you check Google Classroom before you close your computer and get out of here for the day. And thanks for listening.